What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. We'll continue this conversation with you concerning the complete history of boxing. On August 3rd, 1912, Patel draws with Harlem Tommy Murphy in 20 rounds in defense of his featherweight championship crown. The contest took place in San Francisco, California. On August 3rd, 1912, Sam Langford defeats Australian heavyweight champion Sam McVeigh in 20 rounds to become the new Australian heavyweight champion of the world. He would regain his colored heavyweight championship title in Sydney Stadium in Sydney, Australia. Now, Sam Langford would become a two-title champion. It was the colored heavyweight champion and the Australian heavyweight champion that he would become on that night of August 3rd, 1912. Sam McVeigh had the Australian heavyweight championship title. And Sam Langford was promised a shot at the world heavyweight championship title. But he was reneged by Jack Johnson. And this was what was happening to Sam McVeigh, Joe Jeanette, Sam Langford, Jeff Clark, as a matter of fact, Joplin Ghost. And it was just unfortunate for these men that they didn't get the opportunities that they so rightly deserved. And that's why when you go into the laws of boxing, when you look at the historical contents of boxing, when you look at modern fighters, oh, he did this more than him, you have to look at the whole barometer of boxing, because I can't say Sam Langford did something better than Floyd Mayweather, because Sam Langford was probably able to do that in his era where Mayweather was not allowed to do that. I can't say that Mayweather did something better than Sam Langford, because Sam Langford probably couldn't get away with what Mayweather was allowed to get away with based on the rules that he's fighting under today. So that's why it's important to follow this trend that we're setting here, so you can see the difference in rules and the changes that these fighters went through during their reign. On August 19th of 1912, heavyweight Luther McCarthy and future world heavyweight champion Jess Willard go 20 rounds as rules a no decision, no contest in New York's Madison Square Garden. Now, the Boston Daily Globe and the New York Sun and Chicago Tribune all called it a draw, but it was ruled a no contest that evening. Jess Willard received a newspaper decision from the New York Times. Jess Willard was the last-minute replacement. He shouldn't have been on that card, but it was because Arthur Perkley couldn't make that fight during an injury a month prior with a fight that he was in with Jess Willard. The contest took place July 29th, 1912 at New York's Madison Square Garden. On October 10th of 1912, the world colored and Australian heavyweight champion, Boston Bone Crusher, Sam Langford knocks out heavyweight Sam McVeigh in 11 rounds. It was at the Perth Australian Exhibition Stadium, and McVeigh called a body shot. You know, it was a vicious body shot. It was said that you can hear it from 2 rows back from Sam Langford, and McVeigh went down almost as though he got shot, and he was holding his side. But then they called it a foul. And it was not allowed, and the referee did not acknowledge it, so McVeigh didn't come out of his corner in protest. He said if you're not going to acknowledge what he considered to be a low blow, then he wouldn't come out of his corner. And the referee just, what do you want me to do? So that was a controversial bout. Sam Langford hit him with a body shot. You'll read some places it was legitimate, and you'll read some places that it was not. But Sam McVeigh, until he went to his grave, claims it was a low blow. October 12th, 1912, 20-year-old 6'4" heavyweight Luther McCarthy makes his West Coast debut against 26-year-old 6'1" Al Kaufman. Now he actually dropped the big guy 3 times before he was able to get his thoughts together. He punished him and pushed him through the ropes. when a newspaper man has shoved him back into the ring. And that reminds me of when Jack Dempsey was in the ring with Argentinians Luis Angel Firpo in 1923. It was the same scenario, but in this case, it seems like Luther McCarthy was trying to find a way to get this fight over with. And Kaufman was shoved out of the ring, but pushed back in as a newspaperman would try to get him back so that the fight would continue. Now, the referee was Jim Griffin, and he starts to count. And the police chief decided to stop the contest. It was a wild scene, 2 minutes and 12 seconds of that round. And the fans were fighting and they were throwing things in the ring. They were disappointed in what they saw, but they saw that it was foul play taking place and they tried to protest. On October 14th of 1912, Johnny Kilbane defeats Eddie O'Keefe in 12 rounds in defense of his World Featherweight Championship title in Cleveland, Ohio. November 28th, 21-year-old, 5'7.5" 67-inch reach, Willie Ritchie wins the World Lightweight Championship title on the foul against the champion Ad Wargas. Now, again, a lot of dirty tactics were taking place, as you notice, in 1912. It was at the Mission Street Arena in Daly City. The referee was Jim Griffin. He once again was stopped about 2 minutes and 36 seconds in the 16th round, awarding the new champion Willie Ritchie the title. Now, Willie Ritchie was 22 wins, 7 losses, 12 draws, and 6 knockouts. Ad Wargas had 67 wins, 8 losses, 13 draws, with 31 knockouts. On Tuesday, December 1912, 5'5", 69-inch reach, 27-year-old Monty Attell was TKO'd in 9 rounds by 23-year-old, 5'5", 68-inch reach Johnny Kilbane at the Tuxedo Club in Cleveland, Ohio. The referee was Tom McCormick, if I remember his name correctly. I know he stopped the action. The contest took place in Cleveland, so the Cleveland police would decide to get involved after Attell went down 6 times and they decided to stop the contest. Once again, there was foul play taking place in 1912. On Tuesday, December 10th, 20-year-old Luther Lucky McCarthy, he batters 32-year-old fireman Jim Flynn, and he beat him to a pulp. The crowd and the spectators ordered the referee Charles Eiton to stop the slaughter in 16 rounds. And so he did. On Thursday, December 26th, 29-year-old Boston Bone Crusher Sam Langford knocks out 28-year-old Sam McVeigh in the 13th round in defense of his Australian and colored heavyweight championship title. Arthur Scott calls it quits. Sydney Stadium. Arthur Scott was the referee, and he was the man on the outside of the ring. And he decided to call it quits because he saw that Sam McVeigh was taking a beating. Sam Langford didn't like the fact that Sam McVeigh claimed in their last fight that he was hit low. Sam Langford felt it was a legitimate punch, so he took it out on Sam McVeigh on the night of Thursday, December 26, 1912. Now, this last fight that we'll talk about for 1912 took place December 27th of that year. 25-year-old 6'2" with a 72-inch reach, Ed Gunboat Smith defeated 25-year-old 6'1", 76-inch reach, Frank Moran. It was what was called a 20-round beating. Gunboat Smith had Frank Moran down at the end of the second round. Half of the paying spectators walked out for a lackluster event. In the middle of the contest, by the 15th round, almost the entire arena walked out. of the Dreamland Rink in San Francisco, California. So that was 1912. A very interesting year. There was a lot of foul play. We mentioned the fighters that were involved in the foul play. That was alleged, of course. But there were some good fights that took place in 1912. As we look at 1913, January 1st of 1913, heavyweight Luther McCarthy stops Al Platzer in 18 rounds, Vernon, California, and he won the White Hope Heavyweight Championship contest. We talked about the White Hope Heavyweight Championship division. As I said, it was created from 1911 to 1915 when he just couldn't defeat Jack Johnson after he would defeat Tommy Burns in 1908. The White Hope Heavyweight Championship title was created by the members of the South when Jack Johnson killed Tommy Burns in 14 rounds in Australia. He would become the champion. And they decided to protest in some way and create their own division. And what was interesting about that was that this was duplicated many times in boxing history. I told you about Richard K. Fox. He had a heavyweight by the name of Daniel Knox. He would start him off in the colored division tournament. And that's how the colored division would begin. But in this case, black fighters were trying to get opportunities to fight for the World Championship division, and they were denied. So after the battle royales were taking place, that's when they realized they could make good money off this, and they created the colored championship divisions. January 27th of 1913, featherweight Jim Driscoll and Owen Moran draw 20 rounds in London, England, to remain the British recognition featherweight champion. February 12th of 1913, the future world light heavyweight champion, George Compartier, knocks out Rice. He stopped him in 2 rounds. And he picked up the vacant European light heavyweight championship crown in Paris, France. George Compartier was known as the Orchard Man from France. And as I said, he was in the ring with many, many great fighters during his reign. He fought in almost every division. He is underrated by many observers today. In today's discussion, he's very underrated. When he was fighting, of course not. Everyone knew he was a superstar. He was a great fighter. But in today's conversation, he's underrated. He's not talked about as much. A lot of people don't know enough about George Compartier to appreciate him as they should. He was the Orchid Man. He was a fantastic fighter. He was also in the military as well. So, good fighter was George Compartier. He would lose his title to Balansiki. And Balansiki would become the first black light heavyweight champion in boxing history. He would win that title from battling Levinsky. Very good fighter was George Compartier. Now, in March 1913, March 16 to be exact, the Boston Bone Crusher, Sam Langford, knocks out Jim Barry in 1 round, scheduled for 20 rounds, at Sydney Stadium. And the Boston Bone Crusher would win. These two men would be in the ring with one another 12 times. And they would mix it up pretty good with one another. There was a couple of no decisions. I believe there were 6 no decisions. But Sam Langford knew the number of Jim Barry, March 24th of 1913, the Oxnard Cyclone. Sam McVeigh and Boston Bone Crusher, Sam Langford, would draw 20 rounds. One of 11 fights was a draw, and it went 20 rounds. The fight took place at the Olympic Stadium in Brisbane. The referee was Major Fred Craig. He calls it uneven, and Langford would defend his colored heavyweight championship title against Sam McVeigh, and that was a conversation that a lot of people would have later on because it was somewhat controversy, if you will. But Sam Langford, once again, was a hell of a fighter. Sam McVeigh was as well. April 2nd, 1913, the heavyweight is floored 3 times by former world heavyweight champion Noah Brusso, Tommy Burns, and he receives a 6-round clear-cut decision. Sam Langford has a 10-round exhibition with Jerry Jerome, and that was very interesting that year. April 11th of 1913. Surprisingly, the future featherweight champion, Eugene Creaky, gets defeated by Bermondsey, London's Sid Smith. He stood 5'4". He was a flyweight and lost his chance at the World Flyweight Championship title. Now, who was Sid Smith? He was born February 2nd, 1889, in Bermondsey, London. He died April 28, 1948, in Henson, London. He fought from 1907 to 1919. He had 100 total bouts, 78 wins, 17 losses, 11 knockouts. He was stopped 8 times and had 5 draws. He had 3 losses to the greatest flyweight champion, Jimmy Wilde. He was known as the Mighty Atom, all by knockout, all under 9 rounds. December 12, 1915, Jimmy defeated him. And he made his claim for the British Championship title, 112-pound title, December 12th, 1914. And Jimmy Wilde, in fact, I think I'll show you some images in the scrapbook about Jimmy Wilde. He was a fantastic fighter. He would lose his title to Pancho Villa. Of course, that was towards the end of Jimmy Wilde's career. But Jimmy Wilde was something else, man. He was really good fighter, was Jimmy Wilde. Saturday, April 19th. 28-year-old Harlem Tommy Murphy defeats Michigan Wildcat Al Wargas, who was 35 years of age at that time, in 20 rounds in Daly City, California. The referee was Jim Griffin, and he had his hands full in that bout because both men were doing everything they needed to do to win the contest. April 29th of 1913, the Scotch Wop. 19-year-old Johnny Dundee draws with world featherweight champion Johnny Kilbane, 20 rounds. Kilbane would remain featherweight champion for 10 more years, while never again giving Johnny Dundee a shot at his crown. At 29 years old, Johnny Dundee wouldn't get another shot until 10 years later. And every time I think about that, he was deprived of an opportunity over one fighter, because that one fighter had a 10-year reign and a 10-year vice grip on that crown, and he would never give him a second shot. This reminds me of the black fighters during that time. They were denied opportunities. And as we go up to Charlie Burley, and Coco Kidd, Holman Williams, many of them. You had fighters such as the Harlem Thunderbolt, Harry Smith. You had Jack McVeigh. Many of those fighters were denied opportunities as we go back to Sam Langford and go back to all of these fighters. Dave Holly, Jack Blackburn, Bobby Dobbs, all of them. They were denied the opportunity. So Johnny Dundee pretty much got a chance to find out what it would be like to be treated that way when he was in the ring with Johnny Kilbane. I might show you that fight as well in the scrapbook. Now, on May 13th, 1913, the world heavyweight champion Jack Johnson gets arrested, and he was charged with the Mann Act for illegally crossing state lines with his own wife, Belle Shriver, who was a white woman. The charge was for immoral purposes, and he was tried and he was convicted. Now, Belle Shriver was underage, but he was legally married to her. Belle Shriver's mother got the law involved because she wanted her daughter back. And since Jack Johnson crossed the state line, that law wasn't meant for one person. It was meant for a group of women who was transported for sexual gratification purposes, but they went after the one man, Jack Johnson, because they had no other reason, no other charges to nail him on. And Again, this is unfortunate. These are some of the things that they had to go through. It was an all-white jury in Chicago. Sentencing date was June 4th, 1913. And Jack Johnson, this is why in his memoir he would state that he took a dive in 1915. We will get to that, with Jess Willard in Cuba Havana. He had left the country. He mingled in with the baseball team, had on their uniform just to get out of Dodge. And he would wind up in different areas, but he landed in Cuba Havana. And he would face, in fact, this same year, 1913, it would become the first all-black cast for the heavyweight championship title when you had Battling Jim Johnson and Jack Johnson, the Galveston Giant, fight for the colored heavyweight the world championship title. And that was amazing. But Jack Johnson would wind up losing to Jess Willard in 1915. As I said, we will get to that. On May 20th of 1913, Ed Gunbo Smith defends his White Hope heavyweight championship title against future world heavyweight championship titleist Jess Willard in 20 rounds in San Francisco, California. Now, January 23rd, 1915, middleweight Jeff Smith would defeat Les Darcy by disqualification in 5 rounds. The contest took place in Sydney, Australia, and he would retain his recognition as middleweight champion. Now, Jeff Smith was in the ring with Mike Mateague, who would become a light heavyweight champion when he would defeat Balansiki. He would take on Mike O'Dowd, who was a middleweight champion. He would defeat Al McCoy. He would take on Bob Moha, who was a heavyweight, took on Harry Greb 7 times. Was in the ring with Lee Anderson. He was in the ring with a lot of fighters. Les Darcy, Faye Kaiser, Tommy Loughran, Jamaica Kid, many of them. But who was Jeff Smith? His name was Jerome Jeffords. He was known as the Bayonne Globetrotter. He was born April 23rd, 1891 in Brooklyn, New York. He died May 3rd, 1962. He was 70 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in Levittown, New Jersey. He stood 5 foot 8.5 inches, had a 71-inch reach as middleweight, total bout career of 106 bouts, 88 wins, 12 losses, 48 knockouts, and he was stopped 3 times with 3 draws. He's the only fighter who traveled around the world completely fighting. He was a remarkable fighter. For Les Darcy, now who was Les Darcy? James Leslie Darcy, who was known as the Matinee Wonder. And he was born October 31st, 1895 in Stradbroke Island. He died May 24th, 1917 in Stradbroke Island, Queensland, Australia. He stood 5 foot 6 inches, had a 71-inch reach at middleweight, fought from 1910 to 1916, had a total bout career of 50 bouts, 46 wins, 4 losses, 29 knockouts, and 4 draws. He defeated George Chip, Eddie McCarthy, George K.O. Brown. An outstanding fighter was Les Darcy. January 23rd, 1915, he was losing a disqualification in 5 rounds to Jeff Smith, Australian World Middleweight Championship. May 22nd, 1915, he would win his disqualification for the World Middleweight Championship recognized by Australia. These 2 men would mix it up, Jeff Smith and Les Darcy. All right, so the last bout we'll talk about took place in 1915. January 25th to be exact. You had a fighter by the name of Tansy Lee. He stops Jimmy Wilde in 17 rounds in London, England. And he remained the British and European flyweight champion. Jimmy Wilde, William James Wilde. His name was the Mighty Atom. That's what they called him. He was born May 12, 1892 in Quaker Yard, Wales, United Kingdom. He died March 10th, 1969. He was 76 years of age at the time of his death, and he would reside in Tylerstown, Wales. He stood 5 foot 2.5 inches, had a 66-inch reach. He was a flyweight champion. He had a total bout career of 143 bouts, 131 wins, 3 losses, 98 knockouts. He was stopped 3 times with 1 draw. January 21st, 1915, he would lose the vacant run by the European Boxing Union, International Boxing Union, the club title to Tansy Lee. Now, June 18th, 1923, he would lose his title to Pancho Villa in 7 rounds. He was stopped by Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa, as we know, he would die. And he had an infection, a blood clot in his throat. He had a tooth pulled. He was in a ring with Jimmy McLaurin. And Jimmy McLaurin was a babyface assassin. He was out of Canada. He was a fantastic fighter. And that was an unfortunate incident that took place with Pancho Villa. Saturday, February 20th, 1915. Oxnard Cyclone Sam McVeigh defeats Battling Jim Johnson in 20 rounds in Cuba Havana. Defense of his colored world heavyweight championship crown. Battling Jim Johnson. He was born September 2nd, 1887 in Danville, Virginia. He died November 6, 1918 in East Orange, New Jersey. That's where Johnny Dundee was lived. That's where he was born. He stood 5 foot 9.5 inches, had a 76-inch reach, fought from 1909 to 1918, had a total bout career of 50 bouts, 25 wins, 17 losses, 21 knockouts, and he was stopped 17 times. He was in the ring with Black Bill, Joe Jeanette, Jeff Clark, the Joplin Ghost, Harry Wills, the Brown Panther, George Kid Cotton, Kid Norfolk. His name was William Ward. He was a colored light heavyweight champion. Sam McVeigh, the Oxnard Cyclone, and Sam Langford, the Boston Bone Crusher. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series, stating all great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Let's continue the complete history of boxing in our next conversation. Thanks for listening. Be well. Peace.